I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country.
In Mexico, the army has confirmed the death of one of the country's most feared drug lords, known as El Mencho, caught and killed in a dawn raid.
Now parts of the country under attack. As flights are canceled, streets are closed, and tourists told to shelter in place.
Was the death of Mexico's most feared cartel boss purely the result of a Mexican military operation? Or was Donald Trump secretly behind the strike? That question has sparked intense debate ever since Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, was killed in a high-risk security operation in western Mexico on 22 February 2026. Almost immediately, social media exploded with claims that the United States had played a direct role, suggesting the mission wasn't just backed by U.S. intelligence, but may have been orchestrated from across the border. Some unverified reports even suggested the cartel was retaliating, attacking an airport and hotels, and taking Americans hostage. Yet the official record tells a more complex story. El Mencho, the elusive leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, had long stood at the top of both Mexico's and America's most wanted lists. A former police officer who rose through the underworld to build one of the most powerful criminal enterprises in the Western Hemisphere, he presided over a cartel known for ruthless expansion, military-grade firepower, and strategic innovation. Under his leadership, CJNG grew from a regional force in Jalisco into a sprawling network present across Mexico and deeply embedded in the United States. The U.S. government had placed a $15 million bounty on information leading to his capture. For years, he evaded arrest. But in February, Mexican special forces moved against him in the town of Tapalpa, in Jalisco state. According to Mexico's defense ministry, the operation was planned and executed by Mexican forces, with aircraft from the Mexican Air Force and units from the National Guard deployed. El Mencho was injured during the raid, and later died in custody as he was being transported to Mexico City. That should have been the end of the story, a high-profile victory in Mexico's long war against organized crime. Instead, it became the beginning of a new controversy. Within hours of his death, violence erupted across multiple states. Highways were blocked with burning vehicles. Armed men shut down transport corridors. In tourist hotspots like Puerto Vallarta, plumes of dark smoke rose into the sky as frightened visitors described scenes resembling a war zone. Flights were suspended, public transport was halted, schools canceled classes. Governors issued code red warnings and urged residents to remain indoors. The retaliation was swift, coordinated, and expansive, stretching across more than half a dozen states. In Guanajuato alone, dozens of incidents were reported in a single day. In Aguascalientes, military vehicles rolled through residential streets. The situation grew increasingly alarming as unverified reports surfaced on social media from conservative commentator Laura Loomer, alleging that Americans were under attack at Guadalajara Airport and being taken hostage on nearby highways and in hotels. Meanwhile, the United States Embassy issued a shelter-in-place alert for American citizens in several states, including Jalisco, Tamaulipas, Michoacán, Guerrero, and Nuevo León. The scale of the backlash underscored one reality. Removing a cartel kingpin does not instantly dismantle the machinery he built. And that reality is central to understanding why President Trump had placed such heavy pressure on Mexico in the months leading up to the operation. Fentanyl has become one of the deadliest drugs in the United States. According to figures released by U.S. Customs and Border Protection in 2025, more than 9,000 pounds of fentanyl had been seized since October 2024. 96% of it was intercepted at the southwest border with Mexico. Less than 1% came through the northern border with Canada. Mexico is widely regarded as the principal production hub and transit corridor for U.S.-bound fentanyl. CJNG, alongside other major cartels, has been a central player in that trade. The cartel earns billions from synthetic opioid production, in addition to cocaine, methamphetamine, and other narcotics. It has also diversified into fuel theft, extortion, human smuggling, and financial fraud. For Trump, who framed drug trafficking as both a public health crisis and a national security threat, the cartels represented more than criminal organizations.
Under the orders I signed today, we will also be designating the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations.
In 2025, his administration designated certain Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations. That move unlocked new categories of U.S. military and intelligence support. It also signaled a shift in rhetoric, from law enforcement cooperation to a posture that resembled counterterrorism strategy.
We've knocked out 97% of the drugs coming in by water, and we are going to start now hitting land with regard to the cartels. The cartels are running Mexico. It's very, very sad to watch and see what's happened to that country, but the cartels are running, and they're killing 250, 300,000 people in our country every single year.
Trump repeatedly argued that drug cartels had seized control of large swaths of Mexico, and he pointed to what he described as dramatic success stopping illicit drugs at sea as part of his justification for expanding the fight. The U.S. military, under a campaign launched in 2025, conducted dozens of strikes on vessels in the Caribbean Sea and Eastern Pacific that the administration claimed were carrying narcotics bound for the United States, and Trump publicly asserted that this effort had intercepted nearly all maritime drug traffic. Building on that narrative, he pointed to the high-profile U.S. military operation inside Venezuela that resulted in the capture and removal of its president on drug-related charges as proof that decisive action on land was possible. From Trump's perspective, those developments underpinned his warning that, having largely neutralized the sea routes, the U.S. would begin targeting cartel infrastructure on land, including in Mexico, if necessary.
If Mexico wanted help with the cartels, we would be honored to go in and do it. I told her that. I would be honored to go in and do it. Well, she's so afraid of the cartel, she can't walk, so, that's the reason.
He left open the possibility of U.S. forces accompanying Mexican troops on raids against fentanyl labs. Reports surfaced that Washington was pressing Mexico to allow U.S. Special Operations troops, or CIA officers, to operate alongside Mexican soldiers. Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, drew a clear line. She emphasized coordination without subordination. She rejected any unilateral U.S. military intervention on Mexican soil. In public statements, she stressed that sovereignty was not negotiable. This tension formed the backdrop to Mencho's killing. At the same time, a new U.S. military-led structure had quietly come online, the Joint Interagency Task Force Counter-Cartel, known as JITF-CC. Formally launched in January, the task force brings together multiple U.S. government agencies with a mission to map, disrupt, and dismantle cartel networks along both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. U.S. officials confirmed that JITF-CC played a role in the operation that led to Mencho's death. They described the contribution as intelligence support. A former U.S. official said a detailed target package had been compiled and provided to the Mexican government, including information from U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Mexico's defense ministry acknowledged receiving complementary information from U.S. authorities. However, both U.S. and Mexican officials stressed that the raid itself was conducted by Mexican forces. There was no official confirmation of U.S. troops on the ground. Despite that, speculation exploded online. Conservative commentator Laura Loomer posted on social media that Mencho had been eliminated by the Trump administration. She suggested that if President Sheinbaum had been solely responsible, she would be at risk of cartel retaliation. She characterized the mission as clearly U.S.-supported. There is no official evidence that the United States ordered or directly carried out the operation. But the optics, a U.S. military-led task force providing intelligence, a president who had publicly threatened land strikes, and a cartel boss at the top of America's target list suddenly killed, fueled the narrative. To understand why such rumors gained traction, it helps to examine how CJNG evolved under Mencho. Founded around 2010 in Jalisco, the cartel rapidly expanded through violent territorial conquest. It downed a Mexican army helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade. It attacked security forces and public officials. It hung bodies from bridges as intimidation tactics. It pioneered the use of drones in armed attacks in rural areas. It imposed taxes on legitimate businesses. It embedded itself in local political and economic systems. Over time, Mexico's criminal landscape fragmented. Analysts estimate that roughly 400 groups now operate nationwide. The largest, including CJNG, function less like hierarchical gangs and more like complex corporate networks. One estimate suggests cartels collectively employ between 160,000 and 185,000 people across Mexico. Beyond core leadership, there may be hundreds of thousands of contractors who facilitate logistics, transport, and enforcement. That fragmentation is precisely why Trump's stated goal of simply taking out the cartels is so complicated. Experts argue that removing a kingpin does not necessarily collapse the organization. Previous strategies focused on targeting high-level leaders often resulted in splintering, infighting, and more localized violence. The capture of Ovidio Guzman, son of Joaquín El Chapo Guzman, triggered urban warfare in Culiacán. The detention of Ismael El Mayo Zambada led to bloody internal struggles within the Sinaloa cartel. El Mencho's death may follow a similar pattern. Security analysts are watching for factional battles within CJNG that could last years. In the immediate aftermath, President Sheinbaum sought to reassure the public. She stated that in most parts of the country, daily life continued normally. She framed the killing as a major victory for Mexico's war against drug trafficking. From Washington, praise followed. U.S. officials described the development as significant for Mexico, the United States, and the broader region. The White House press secretary acknowledged that U.S. intelligence support had been provided and commended the Mexican military's execution of the operation. This dual narrative, Mexican sovereignty on the ground, U.S. intelligence in the background, sits at the center of the controversy. Did Trump directly order a strike? There is no evidence to support that claim. Did U.S. intelligence play a role? Officials have confirmed that it did. The distinction matters. Intelligence sharing between the two countries is long-standing, but the creation of a military-led task force modeled in part on counterterrorism operations against groups like Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State represents a strategic evolution. It signals that the United States increasingly views cartels through a national security lens rather than solely as criminal enterprises. At the same time, the political risks are high. Any perception of U.S. boots on Mexican soil could inflame nationalist sentiment, strain diplomatic relations, and potentially destabilize trade ties between two of each other's largest partners. Mexico has deep historical memories of U.S. interventions. President Sheinbaum's balancing act involves cooperating on security while resisting any suggestion of subordination. For Trump, the optics of a major cartel leader eliminated during his renewed pressure campaign are politically potent. He had repeatedly warned that if Mexico would not take out the cartels, the United States might act. He had asserted that the cartels were running Mexico. He had suggested land strikes were imminent. Then, within weeks of those statements and the launch of a new U.S. military-led task force, Mexico's most wanted drug lord was dead. Correlation is not proof of orchestration, but in the realm of politics and perception, timing fuels speculation. Whether history will interpret this episode as a milestone in bilateral cooperation or as the first visible chapter in a deeper U.S. operational role inside Mexico remains to be seen. What is clear is that the killing of El Mencho did not end the cartel crisis. It exposed its complexity. It demonstrated the limits of kingpin strategies, and it intensified the debate over how far the United States is willing to go in its campaign against fentanyl. In the end, the question may not be whether Trump pulled a trigger or ordered a strike. The deeper question is how intertwined U.S. and Mexican security strategies have become in confronting a drug trade that spans borders, fuels billions in revenue, and leaves communities in both countries scarred. El Mencho is dead, but the cartel landscape he shaped remains volatile. And the debate over how far the United States should go in confronting it is far from settled.